We live drums.
Hello, I'm Gary France. Welcome back to part 3 of our series on timpani. This video will focus on tone production. Now I'm comfortable, I'm sitting here at my drums, I feel I can reach everything, and now we're going to think a little bit about what kind of sound we're going to make and how we make it. Let's talk a little bit about my tools of the trade that I have in my tray here. You'll see that in my tray, I've got some various different sized mallets. I've got a couple tennis balls that I'm going to use to show you a little bit about my tone production. I've got a drum dial here where I'll talk about tuning. I have a series of mufflers. I have some different aids that I use for tuning the timpani. And I have these little things here. These are sponges. Now, when I used to play calf, these drums are school drums at the Australian National University. We've got mylar plastic heads on them right now. But when I was playing on calf, I designed these sponges. These are sponges that I tied, and I used fishing line, and I created a string like this. And you remember back to our first video where I held up the bowl of the timpani. Well, what would happen is if I'm playing on calf skins, the lights overhead in a concert hall would dry out the skin during the concert, and this would mean that the pitch would go up. So about an hour before every concert that I would play, I would soak my sponges in water, I'd put them up inside the drum, and they would keep a nice humid environment. Now this is not unlike, I think, our double bass players have humidifiers that they put in their instruments and things like this. This is very important, and of course, the science of timpani, well, it's not an exact science. So, you have to prepare for too much humidity, not enough humidity. And I thought that you might find these interesting for me to show you of what I used when I was working with calf. Okay, now I have a wide selection of mallets, and I think our video team have shot the table of I don't know, 50, 60 sets of mallets. But what I put on the stand today is just a set of graduated mallets, from soft to hard. And these particular ones I'm using today are by Adams. This is just a set of mallets, the Cloyd Duff series. And I find that all of the mallets are a little bit different. And of course, what I used on calf, I wouldn't use on plastic. And whether I'm using my innovative percussion mallets or David Morby mallets or these, all different mallets are for different tones. And as a percussionist, we really need to have that selection of tone available. So we'll talk about that a little bit when we get started. Now let's get back to nuts and bolts. For every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. This is no truer than on the major membranophones, the timpani. When we play a drum, we want our mallets to come back to us so that we're not working too hard. So what I do with my students, and I first saw this, I might add that most of the ideas I'm presenting today, I have learned from other people. I've learned from workshops and clinics, and I freely pass on this information. I think that's what it's all about, sharing information and striving to be the best that we can be. I learned this, I went to a Fred Hinger, the wonderful timpanist from Philadelphia Orchestra and the Metropolitan Opera Orchestra, and just a genius with making things. Us percussionists are resourceful people, and we often make little tools and our sticks, and I've made sticks before and mallets, and I do a lot of my own maintenance. And I would encourage our young percussionists to do this as well. Let's get into tone production. Now, I use a tennis ball in the same way I demonstrated before on the snare drum, that for every action there's an equal and opposite reaction. And you notice that when I drop the ball, I actually get a pretty good sound. It's not a bad sound at all. It's clear, depending on where I drop it. If I drop it at the center, which is the nodal point, if I drop it on the edge, you get a different sound. So where is the best place to play the kettle drum or the timpani? Well, There is no best place. There are different places depending on the sound that you want to get. If, for the most part, if we're playing on the edge of the drum, you get a lot of high harmonic content. I can't think that that's what the composer asked for. I think they want a beautiful tone that blends with the orchestra and whoever they're playing with. If we play dead center, it's the nodal point, the point of the least amount of vibration. And that, I don't think, is what we're after, although could be very useful in terms of an effect. And Elliott Carter's 6 pieces for timpani, in some of his works, he uses that technique quite effectively. Now, we're going to come in about 1/3 of the way in to the center, right about here. You can hear that that's a lovely, freely ringing sound. Because we're dealing with a circle, it doesn't really matter whether you play here, or here, or here, as long as you're in that same perimeter. The only thing that will make a difference is if your drum is not in tune. So let's talk a little bit about that tuning so we can get this concept clear in our mind. Again, we've spoken about these 8 lugs. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And each one of the tension rods, I call them lugs, but they're really tension rods. Each one of these tension rods pulls on the rim. So it makes sense that if any one of the tension rods is out of tune or looser than the others, you'll get a different pitch. Now let me purposely, there we go. Let me purposely detune one of the lugs. So I've tuned that one up a little bit. Let's see what it sounds like. You know, I can't hear it that clearly, so what I often do is I'll put a little something in the center of the head. I'll put a little dampening here. You can hear how that's a little bit higher. If the drum is tighter, now we're really hearing that, aren't we? And you'll hear with a little bit heavier mallet, that's quite a variation in pitch. And surprisingly enough, the opposite tension rod is also high. How can that be? Well, in fact, the opposite lug or tension rod affects. If this one is high, this one will be high. And of course, if this is a little bit high, then we can expect this one to be a little higher than this one. Very subtle, but you can hear it. And higher again. So that means that each of the tension rods affects the other tension rods to some extent. So it's essential that we get them all the same. Now, when I first started tuning and didn't have besides using our ear, which of course we should develop, which is a major part of playing the timpani, but outside of that, I had a very rudimentary piece of wood that I had here with a little screw in it, like this. And surprisingly enough, I remember the first time that I set this piece of wood on the skin like this and measured the distance to where that would come in contact with the rim, I noticed that as I moved it around the rim, lo and behold, we had huge variation in the distance between the rim and the skin, or the bearing edge. When I made those preliminary adjustments, it made a dramatic difference. And that was when I realized that, wow, it is not that complicated to start to get your drum in better tune, clear with itself. There's a new product out, and there's under a lot of different names. This is a thing called a drum dial. And what this does is it actually has a gauge on it, and it measures the tension at any place on the rim. So you'd set it there, and it has a little dial, and it measures your tension. And this particular one here, it's measuring at, and you can adjust the dial, but this is about 94. And when I turn it over here, I notice, wow, that's out quite a bit. So you can use this to go around and retune your different lugs to be in keeping. You'll also notice, and we could talk for hours about tuning. My teacher, I've had several wonderful teachers, Doug Eigelsrud, Sal Rabbio, some wonderful, wonderful teachers who I've had only a brief amount of time with, always wanting more, used to spend a lot of time on tuning. And I think as I started playing professionally, I spent a great deal of time on tuning. Developing my ear, and also every day with my drums. I would spend, half an hour, 40 minutes a day when I first started doing this, just spending time working on the skins. And that's when you really start getting a feel for, you get a real feel for what is in tune and setting up your drum. So once again, equal tension. We use our ear. We have some tools that we can use, drum dials. We have different kinds of gauges. And we bring our drum in tune with itself. Now you've noticed these little things I have here. These are mufflers, and they're different items that I have for muffling the drum. This is a little piece of a chamois. If I put that on the center of the drum, it really changes the tone. I might have it, some pieces call for your drums to be muffled, right? And there are some orchestral works that call for this coperti, covered. Coperti is the Italian term, and or coperto. And so sometimes, if I'm playing and I want a passage to be very soft, I may put a little something on the center of the drum. I have a lot of different materials that I can use. And this is part of the joy of playing timpani in the orchestra. You're there on your own, you're in the back, you can decide how best to blend with everybody. So these are our mufflers, and I thought I should mention that. The mallets I have, you notice that I have a graduated set. Let's just bring our pitch back down. Let's have a listen to the different sounds. The mallets that we have as percussion players and timpanists really define our timbral set of choices and colors. We'll start with something, I like these. These are nice and heavy, deep and rich. And we drop it down one. Wood. boy, let's compare extremes. In Baroque and classical performance practice, quite often they were playing on thicker skins. They were calf, and they were thicker skins, and they often played with wood. I do have some different types of mallets. Of course, you've seen a large selection here, but we have some interesting ones. These are Viennese mallets, and the drums would be smaller for earlier drums. And these are Kaufmann's, made in Vienna. Covered with a little bit of a chamois leather and wood. Right? So we have the timpani mallets, a huge variety, and quite often your pieces do not specify what kind of mallets you want. And except Berlioz was fantastic with this. He requested mallets a sponge of sponge or of felt. Wooden Holzschlagel mallets with wooden mallets. And the timpanist needs to have a wide selection of these for their color and their choice. We won't get too much into the repertoire, as this is a basic introductory lesson. I just want to spend a few more minutes before we're done continuing with this concept of tone production. We talked about the bouncing of the ball, the dropping of the ball, right? I'll probably get a pretty good roll just by playing with the bouncing balls. Right? Not a bad sounding roll. Right? And that's because it's freely vibrating, freely bouncing. And we want to do that same thing with our timpani mallets. Our grip, let's get a close-up of our grip. We have two basic grips in timpani playing. We have the French style, which is with a thumb up. And you can see my thumbs are up here. My fulcrum is between my first finger and my thumb. My wrist, it's like our traditional snare drum stick, which is a rotation. Here I've got this angle in here and I'm rotating. Thumbs are up. And my wrists are rotating. The German grip has our hands turned over, much like our match grip on snare drum. You can hold your sticks back, sort of at the back, with a lifting of stroke. The most important feature to remember is that the amount of flesh that you actually have on your mallet or your stick will determine your tone. And you'll say, well, how can that be? How can there be such a difference? Well, let's have a listen, okay? I'm going to take a little bit more articulate mallet, and I'm going to squeeze it very hard. And now I'm going to be loose. I can definitely hear a difference. And I believe it's because as you hold the mallet tighter, when you're tight and you're locked up, you notice my fulcrum is closed, it actually keeps the mallet on the skin for a microsecond more. And if I wanted to create a very articulate staccato sound, I might actually bear down like that. A legato open sound. Like so. We can roll also with our fingers, and we looked a little bit at that in our snare drum technique, but take a look at my hand here. First, I'm just going to play with my wrist, and now I'm going to go to my fingers. motion shot of that later on. But if you look at my fingers, I can actually go like first finger, second finger. I practice little rudiments like a paradiddle. Little tricky work with my fingers, and I can roll with just my fingers. Effective. Rolling with our arm, our lower arm, our fingers, our wrist. So that's a little bit of basic technique. Let's talk about dampening. You notice that I dampened the drums a little bit. Yes, I do. We use our musical taste to dictate dampening. If the bass or if the orchestra is playing you notice that when I'm playing the A and the D, I don't want them to ring together. Let's make it better yet. Let's make it a C. Can you hear how they bleed into each other versus if I can what am I actually doing? I'm dampening with 3 fingers. At the precise moment, I play the other drum. Slowing it down a little bit. So this way we're able to create a legato melodic line. And if the orchestra is silent, you should be silent. You shouldn't ring through. So we dampen. The timpanist has to develop skills of dampening and blending with the orchestra. So our basic dampening, you can dampen with the opposite hand. And we try to not hear the dampening. You can dampen with the same hand. And those are our methods of dampening. Very basic, very introductory lesson, but I thought you might find that helpful. Okay, that concludes our introductory lessons on the timpani. We've looked at the makeup, how they're put together. We've looked at a little bit on tone production, and I look forward to working with you in our classes about working on specific exercises. Thank you. Should you have questions about any of this, of course, you can contact me at garyfrance.com. Thank you very much.
We live drums.